Los Angeles is no stranger to ghost stories, but few places carry an air of mystery quite like the Vincent Price House. Tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, this elegant yet eerie residence has been the subject of whispered rumors and strange occurrences for decades. The house, once owned by the legendary actor Vincent Price, is famous not only for its Gothic architecture but for the unsettling presence felt by those who visit. Perhaps it is the influence of Price's many roles in classic horror films, or perhaps something lingers within its walls. Visitors often speak of the library, a grand room lined with towering bookshelves filled with dusty tomes and first editions. The air here is different, heavy with something unspoken. Those who sit alone, immersed in a book, have reported faint murmurs, whispered voices just at the edge of perception. Some claim to hear the turning of pages when no one else is there. Others swear they have caught glimpses of shifting shadows in the dim candlelight. The eeriness extends beyond the library. In the lobby, where a grand staircase sweeps up into the darkness of the second floor, a chill lingers in the air. Even on the warmest Los Angeles nights, visitors describe feeling an icy draft curling around their ankles. The windows remain tightly shut, and yet the cold persists, a phantom breeze from an unseen source. A former caretaker, who lived in the house for several years, once recounted an incident that still gives him chills. One evening, while locking up for the night, he heard footsteps echoing in the hallway. Assuming an intruder had entered, he rushed to investigate only to find the corridor empty. As he turned to leave, the footsteps started again, now directly behind him. He spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. Over the years, paranormal investigators have attempted to unravel the mystery of the Vincent Price House. Some claim residual energy from the actor's presence still lingers, while others believe something much older calls the house its home. Whatever the truth, one thing remains certain: when you step inside, you are never truly alone. Not long ago, a group of documentary filmmakers received permission to spend the night in the Vincent Price House. Their goal was simple: to capture evidence of the unexplained phenomena. What they found was something far more disturbing. The team set up cameras in the library, the lobby, and the second floor hallway, the areas most often associated with strange occurrences. As the night deepened, they took turns keeping watch, whispering among themselves as the house seemed to settle into an unsettling stillness. At precisely 2:13 a.m., the camera in the library picked up something strange. The books on the highest shelf, untouched for years, began shifting on their own. A low, rustling sound like fingers running along brittle pages filled the room. Then the voices began, faint at first, barely above a murmur, but soon growing more distinct. A conversation was taking place, though the words were impossible to make out. The crew listened in silence, their breath held, until one of them whispered, "Do you hear that?" At that moment, every book on the shelf fell at once. The crash shattered the silence, sending them scrambling out of the room. But as they reached the door, they froze. The air had turned icy, their breath visible in the dim light. And then, from behind them, came the unmistakable sound of a chair creaking as if someone had just sat down. Downstairs, the cameraman who had been stationed in the lobby reported an entirely different but equally unsettling experience. The grand staircase, normally still and silent, had begun to groan under the weight of unseen footsteps. He had turned his camera toward the top of the stairs just in time to catch the last step of something moving, just a fleeting blur, vanishing into the darkness. But when they reviewed the footage later, what they saw chilled them to the core. The figure was there, a tall, shadowy silhouette, pausing for just a moment at the top of the stairs before slipping out of sight. It was impossible to make out a face, but one thing was clear: whoever or whatever it was, it had been watching them. And then, just as they began to pack up and leave, the front door, which had been bolted shut, slowly creaked open on its own. To this day, none of them have returned to the Vincent Price House. But the recordings remain, and one detail, barely noticed at first, continues to haunt them. As the shadow figure stood at the top of the stairs, just before vanishing, its head slowly turned, as if it knew it was being watched. In the days following their terrifying night in the Vincent Price House, the documentary crew reviewed the footage over and over, searching for a rational explanation. But the more they watched, the more questions arose. The shadowy figure at the top of the stairs, had it turned toward the camera, or toward something behind them? Determined to uncover more, the lead filmmaker, Daniel Foster, contacted a local historian specializing in Los Angeles's hidden past. What he discovered sent a shiver through him. The house had a history far older than Vincent Price's time there. In the early 1900s, it had belonged to a man named Lawrence Halstead, a reclusive scholar obsessed with the occult. Rumors swirled about strange gatherings held in the library, where muffled voices could be heard late into the night. Some claimed Halstead had been searching for a way to speak beyond the veil. He was found dead in that very library in 1928, his body slumped over his desk, a book of forbidden texts open before him. The cause of death was never determined. Witnesses reported an unnatural chill in the air for weeks afterward, as if something had entered the house the night he died, and never left. Feeling an irresistible pull, Daniel decided to return. This time alone. Armed with only a flashlight, his camera, and a recorder, he entered the house just before midnight. The silence was suffocating. Dust hung in the air, undisturbed since their last visit. His footsteps echoed through the lobby as he approached the library door. Then he heard it. A whisper. Soft, insistent. Not from the library, but from the staircase. His heart pounded as he turned his camera toward the upper floor. The darkness swallowed everything beyond the first few steps. But something was different. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen. And then, a faint creak. The sound of a footstep on the landing above. Daniel's breath hitched. He lifted the camera, focusing on the top of the stairs. For several agonizing seconds, nothing moved. And then, the shadow appeared again. Taller this time. Closer. His camera flickered, static rippling across the screen. His flashlight dimmed. A low murmur filled the air, like voices speaking over one another, layering into a distorted hum. And then, just before the flashlight flickered out completely, a breath. Right behind him. The last thing captured on the camera was Daniel's panicked gasp before the screen cut to black. The next morning, his car was still parked outside. The door to the house stood ajar. But Daniel Foster was never seen again. Daniel Foster's disappearance sent shockwaves through the paranormal community. His crew, desperate for answers, contacted the police, but the investigation led nowhere. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no footprints leading away from the house. It was as if he had simply vanished. But the mystery deepened when his camera was found. It lay at the base of the grand staircase, its casing cracked, yet miraculously, the memory card remained intact. What it contained was never released to the public. Those who viewed the footage described something deeply unsettling. It began with Daniel whispering to himself, narrating his experience. His breathing was tense, his flashlight flickering. Then, the shadow at the top of the stairs appeared. Unlike the previous recording, this time the figure moved, slowly, deliberately, descending step by step. Daniel's voice trembled as he asked, "Who are you?" There was no answer, only the sound of the house shifting, groaning, as if exhaling. The shadow reached the final step, just a few feet from him. And then, the screen glitched. For exactly 6 seconds, the footage became corrupted. When it returned to normal, the library door was open, and Daniel was gone. The last frame of the video, the grand staircase, empty. But in the darkness of the second floor, a faint, distorted whisper could be heard. Audio specialists attempted to clean it up, isolate the voices. What they found was chilling. One word, repeated, "Stay." Some believe Daniel is still there, trapped between worlds, just another voice in the library. But others believe something else entirely, that the house didn't take him. It let him in. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The Vincent Price House was sealed off after Daniel's disappearance. Officially, it was due to safety concerns, unstable foundations, outdated wiring, but those who had been inside knew the real reason. No one wanted to step foot in that house again. But then, something even stranger happened. 2 weeks later, Daniel's phone turned back on. The pinged a cell tower just outside Los Angeles, near the Griffith Park Observatory. His number had been disconnected days before, yet there it was active. A single text was sent from his phone, addressed to one of his crew members, Jenna Ruiz. "Help me. Library." The phone shut off immediately after. Jenna didn't hesitate. She gathered the remaining crew and convinced them to return to the house one last time. She told no one else. No police, no investigators. Just them. If Daniel was alive, if there was even a chance, she had to find out. They arrived just past midnight, the house looming in silence. A thick fog clung to the ground, swirling unnaturally as they approached the front door. It was unlocked, open, as if waiting. Inside, the air was heavy, pressing against their skin like unseen hands. They moved cautiously toward the library, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The bookshelves stood tall, untouched since their last visit. The chairs remained exactly where they had been. Everything looked the same, except for one thing, the book on the desk. It hadn't been there before. Its leather cover was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. A single word was embossed on the spine in faded gold lettering. Halstead. Jenna hesitated, then reached out, fingers trembling as she opened the book. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, symbols, strange markings, something ancient, something wrong. And then the whispers began, louder this time, closer. The temperature in the room plummeted. The air grew thick with the scent of old paper and something else, something damp, like earth after a storm. The shadows along the walls stretched, shifted. And then they heard it. A voice. Daniel's voice. "Jenna, run." The library door slammed shut, and the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the room. Jenna's breath hitched as the whispers closed in, layering over one another, rising like a suffocating tide. Someone or something moved in the blackness, just beyond the reach of her trembling hands. Then a sound. Faint, rhythmic tapping. At first, it seemed random, like fingers drumming against wood. But as Jenna strained to listen, she realized it wasn't random at all. It was deliberate. Pattern. Morse code. She fumbled for her phone, heart pounding, using the faint glow of the screen to scribble down the sequence. The knocks came faster, more frantic, as if whoever, whatever, was tapping knew time was running out. The last sequence finished, and then silence. The darkness pressed in, thick and smothering. The air itself felt alive. A shuddering creak echoed through the room, like someone shifting their weight on the old wooden floor. Then, from directly behind her, a breath. She spun, her flashlight flickering back to life just in time to catch a glimpse of something. A shape in the shadows, too tall, too thin. And its head. It was turned completely upside down. The thing lurched forward. Jenna screamed. The door burst open, and hands grabbed her, pulling her out. The other crew members yanked her into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind them. They ran. Through the lobby, past the grand staircase, toward the exit. The shadows in the house seemed to shift, chase them, the air vibrating with whispers that now screamed. They reached the front door only to find it locked. Jenna turned, her phone screen still glowing in her hand. The Morse code. She hastily translated the sequence. The message chilled her to her core. "I am not Daniel." And then, a cold, skeletal hand wrapped around her wrist. Jenna gasped as the ice-cold grip tightened around her wrist. It wasn't human. The fingers were too long, the pressure unnatural like bone without flesh. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The others didn't seem to see it. They were still fighting with the door, unaware of the thing now pulling her backward into the darkness. She thrashed against it, heart pounding, and then the whispers stopped. A single voice replaced them. Low, hollow, right beside her ear. "You shouldn't have come back." Then the lights flickered back on. Jenna collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Her crew rushed to her side, but she couldn't speak, not yet. She could still feel the phantom grip on her wrist, its freezing imprint lingering. The front door, once locked, now stood wide open. They didn't question it. They ran. Outside, Beneath the cold glow of the streetlights, they finally dared to look back. The house was silent again, still, as if it had never woken at all. But as Jenna turned her phone over in her hands, she noticed something new. Her lock screen had changed. A photo she had never taken. It was of the library, taken from the doorway. And in the center of the frame, barely visible in the dim light, the figure. Not Daniel. Something else. Something watching. And in the reflection of the old glass bookcase behind it, another face. Her own. But the reflection wasn't mimicking her expression. It was smiling. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the screen, her own reflection grinning back at her. A grin she hadn't made. The rest of the crew was still catching their breath, hands on their knees, their faces pale with shock. She didn't tell them. She couldn't. Instead, she turned off the phone and shoved it into her pocket. That night, Jenna didn't sleep. The image burned in her mind. She tried to convince herself it was some kind of glitch, an accidental photo, a trick of the light. But deep down, she knew the truth. The house had let them go. But it hadn't let her go. The next morning, she woke to a strange sensation. Something was off. Her bedroom was colder than usual, the air thick with a faint, musty scent. Old books, dust. And then, she heard it. The faint creaking. A chair moving. From the far corner of the room. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she turned her head and froze. Her desk chair was no longer tucked under her desk. It was pulled out, turned, facing her bed, as if someone had been sitting there, watching. Jenna shot up, grabbing her phone with shaking hands. The screen flickered as she unlocked it, her pulse pounding in her ears. The photo was gone, deleted. In its place was a new one, a dark hallway, long, narrow, lined with towering bookshelves. She recognized it immediately, the library, and at the very end of the hallway, standing in the shadows, was her reflection. Not in a mirror, not in glass, just standing there, waiting. And this time, it wasn't smiling. Jenna's phone slipped from her trembling hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Her breath came in short gasps. The image on the screen, her reflection, standing in the library where she hadn't been, it wasn't possible. She scrambled out of bed, heart pounding, flicking on every light in her apartment. She checked the locks. Secure. The windows. Shut. But the air still felt wrong, heavy, like something unseen had followed her home. Then her phone vibrated. A notification. New photo saved. Jenna didn't touch it. She didn't want to look. But the phone vibrated again. And again. More photos. One after another. Hands shaking. She picked up the device and tapped the screen. The gallery opened. The first image was her hallway. Her apartment hallway. The second closer. The third right outside her bedroom door. Jenna spun around. The door was still shut. Still locked. She wasn't alone. She could feel it. A cold breath on the back of her neck. The lights flickered. The room plunged into darkness. And then, just outside her door, a single knock. Soft. Deliberate. Like fingers tapping on wood. The same pattern she had heard in the library. Morse code. Her blood ran cold as the message clicked into place in her mind. Let me in. And then, her phone screen, now the only source of light, flickered with one final image. The library. The bookshelves. The shadowed figure. And this time, the caption beneath it wasn't in her phone's usual font. It was handwritten. Scrawled. Desperate. Jenna. It's not me. Don't open the door. Then, from the other side of the wood, the doorknob began to turn. Jenna stumbled backward, eyes locked on the twisting doorknob. It shouldn't be moving, her door was locked. Yet, the handle continued to turn, slow and deliberate, as if whatever was on the other side knew she was watching. Her phone buzzed violently in her hand. Another message. Don't let it in. It's not me. Her stomach lurched. The handwriting, it was the same as the message on the last photo. Daniel's. A sharp click echoed through the room. The lock had come undone. The door swung open. The hallway beyond was pitch black. The air was ice cold, thick with the scent of old books and dust. Jenna's breath came in shallow gasps, her muscles frozen. She couldn't move. She couldn't run. Then the footsteps, slow, measured, coming toward her. And then she saw it. Not Daniel. Not anyone she recognized. Her. Another Jenna, stepping into the dim glow of the phone's screen. Identical in every way except for the eyes. They were wrong. Too dark. Too empty. And when it smiled, the grin stretched too wide, too unnatural. As if the skin was merely a mask stretched over something else. The thing reached for her. Jenna screamed. She bolted, her body finally obeying as she lunged for the bedside lamp, slamming her hand against the switch. Light flooded the room. The air shifted in an instant. Warmth returned. The scent of dust and books vanished. The hallway was empty. The door stood open, still and silent. But she wasn't alone. Her phone vibrated once more. One final message. It almost took your place. Jenna's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. Her reflection stared back. Normal. Real. Hers. She exhaled, feeling the weight lift from the air. But deep in her chest, a single thought remained. It was still out there, waiting. And if she ever let her guard down again, it wouldn't need to knock. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.